All right, so welcome back to the channel. Today I am joined by Jesse Kotton again. Sadly, we don't have his face because his camera is dead. This is like a recurring theme on my channel at this point, so we are only hearing Jesse, but I'm very thankful for your presence and I can't wait to talk to you about everything that's going on in the format.
Hey, yeah, sorry about the camera. The lithium battery is dead. Been streaming the last few days with no camera. It sucks, but gotta make do. It's not the end of the world.
No, of course not. You gotta make it work. So, yeah, like, let's just start off by sort of talking about, like, what's it been like for the last, I don't know, month or 2 months since we last talked for you. You've been topping events. Props to you for that. You've been creating content. You've been just doing it pretty much. Like, have you been enjoying the last couple of formats?
Um, the formats for me have just been very meh. Like I haven't felt strongly about them. I don't think I hate them as much as other people, but I also don't love them. I definitely preferred tiers to what we have now. But if we were comparing this to what we had last WCQ season, I prefer this. I did not like all the adventure piles and the Halka Fibrax Scythe Lock nonsense. That was
Yeah.
worse for me. Because Anaspell and stuff was also a thing then, and it was worse for that because it was Anaspell and Scythe Lock. At least, like, a Rise Hard is dumb, but at least it's not Scythe Lock dumb.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I agree 100%. I feel like a lot of people draw comparisons, but like last year was 100% worse because everyone was just trying to do degenerate things, and right now only here and there you will find a degenerate thing. But yeah, like how have you been liking all of the new decks popping up? Because if you've been, looking at nationals in Europe right now, French, Danish nationals, of course, German as well, just took place. Like, what did you think of all the top cut representation of decks?
I think it's rather close to what I expected. There's some rogue topping all these events, and I think that's rather normal. There's always going to be some a bit of like randomness at these events. You're never going to get. You need a tier 0 format to get none of the rogue stuff. So that's why you still see stuff that probably isn't that good, but can sometimes luck it out, like Speedroid topping German nationals.
Yeah, did you see that? That's
Um,
actually wild.
yeah, like that's crazy. But unfortunately, I think that deck is not very good. Got to watch it on the feature match, and I was thoroughly unimpressed with
Oh,
how it
okay.
played.
That's sad. Did you
Yeah.
see the synchron build? Like some kind of synchro pile of, I don't know, I guess just synchron stuff. Not much I can explain other than that, but did you see that?
I have not. No.
I'm not sure if it topped French or which nationals it was. And what about Vanquish Soul? So this is like a deck that's been popping up a lot, and it always manages to go really far. Never quite securing the win, but it was top 4 in Germany, and also like did fairly well at other events. But not a lot of people make it. What do you contribute to that?
I really don't think that deck is good.
Yeah.
It feels like a tier 2 deck to me.
Okay.
Part of it, like, it's every time I've watched a play or played with it or against it, it feels like you're playing a mid-range deck. So you're not doing anything super fancy in the first turn, like Salomon Great Like, where you can end up like a couple small disruptions, nothing too strong, and then you getting a lot of cards follow up that
Yeah.
is like presents a problem to your opponent for the next turn. However, other decks do the same thing if they want to, and I think they can do it better because they can also switch game plans better, and they're also not as fragile. So let's take Cashier for example. Like what you can do with Cashier is go Unicorn, Theosis, Special Fenrir, add another Unicorn, and pass there. Don't even make a Rise. Then you go for that game plan. You're doing a very similar thing, or you have very like sturdy. So you're not weak to that many disruptions. Like Talons doesn't destroy you as bad there. You can't get nibbed. The Imperm on like the Rise Hearts not as bad because now if you Imperm Unicorn, it's not as a game ending. It's just typically a lot safer. And you still have some disruption. Unicorn Defender are still good cards. And then you have follow up in hand with Unicorn. And if they don't clear your field, then it's going to be bad for them. And if they clear your field but also don't put up any gates, it's going to be bad for them because you have Unicorn. And then you also have 4 other cards in hand. So Cash can do that type of game plan very well, and I'd argue it just does it better than Vanquish Soul. But if you have a matchup where you don't want to be playing that type of game plan, and you want to be more aggressive, weaker to like specific cards like Sphere Mode or whatever,
Yeah.
but just for the sake of more interruptions, you actually have that choice with Kashtira. With Vanquish Soul, you're sealing caps out relatively quickly. There's a very like low limit of your actual plays.
Do you like
So I think
how...
like when a deck like
Sorry.
Vanquish Soul should succeed, it's when it's like Engine lines up extremely well into the disruption of every other decks, and I don't think that's necessarily true for Vanquish Soul's case.
Okay, I understand that. Like, I feel like a lot of a lot of its success has got to something to do with people not really being prepared for it enough. It kind of reminds me of, like, I made a comparison when Chaptrick Structure Deck dropped and people just didn't really read the cards. They didn't care about support that much. And then a lot of Chaptrick's decks just did really well, even just Structure Deck based ones. So I feel like some of this success, like, probably has something to do with it. Over here in where I'm from, also, it saw top 8 and only one player played it and he made it to top 8. Like, nobody knew what the cards did. Everyone was just confused to the point where he was able to get wins. So I think it has something to do with that as well. But I do like how they've been printing these kinds of decks, and overall just how these types of, I guess, mid-rangey decks have been performing lately. I feel like that's really cool. Like, I don't know, for Higher Runic is interesting, this deck, and just there's a lot of diversity for people that want to pick up these kinds of decks.
I feel like there is a drop off though in quality. I think there's like 3 decks that I'd like lean to, and then everything else like you can play, but they feel like just a tier below. I think you need to be playing something Runic Sprite related. So I'm counting this as one deck, but this incorporates both the For Hire and the twin version.
Yes.
And then there's the Labyrinth deck, which I think is good enough that it's tier 1 and Kashtira. And I think anything else is kind of just a step below.
Okay, so
like,
I
not
want to...
unplayable, but
yeah. I want you to elaborate on that more, and we'll talk about other decks. But since you mentioned Labyrinth, I cannot go past talking about Eradicators. So, are you one of those people that's like engaging in discussions online when it comes to that? If you've seen any of the, I guess, Eradicator talk, I just
almost
read
never
it.
try. I try and avoid getting engaged in those discussions. It almost feels futile because people like oftentimes are dead set in their ways and they won't listen to you anyways.
Yeah.
So what's the point of trying to like? It stops becoming a discussion and ends up turning into an argument, and it's just a waste of everyone's energy. But that's my actual opinions.
Yeah,
I've been saying those type of cards like Eradicator should be banned for a long time, and I don't think this has anything to do necessarily with Labyrinth. Labyrinth can use those cards pretty well, but they're not the first deck to do so.
Yes.
I've been playing Eradicator in other decks before. I played it in Kashtira at the 250th YCS. If you just go Hacker, rip their extra deck, and then you Eradicator them, that still beats Runic decks and the mirror match back then. So that's the same thing, and it's been searchable other times as well. Even earlier this season. So for YCS Brazil in last August, and then Niagara in September.
Yep.
With Chill Elements, I would send it off Curious, Eradicator, and then Griffin set it back, and then it would make sure that any of these board breaker sprite decks that were popular back then just get slaughtered.
Yep.
The Eradicator's been a searchable card, and even besides cards that search it from the extra deck or main deck, like Lady Labyrinth and Griffin Curious combos, there's still trap cards have that support where they are highly searchable now. So Trap Trick, and then there's a new card called Trap Track, which was just released, which essentially functions as the same thing. You just target a monster you control and destroy, and then set a trap from your deck, and you can use it that turn. But it's the only trap. We only activate one more trap this turn, so it's pretty much another Trap Trick. So you can play up to 9 copies of Eradicator post side if you wanted to, and then at that point you don't need to search it. You will see it almost every game. Throwing Prosperities into the mix. You want to get Eradicator off, you can get Eradicator off, and then you have to ask you. So those cards are so searchable that if those cards are a problem, then they're going to be like played every single game pretty much, and I think that's what we're seeing.
I agree. I think these types of cards, and I also don't like engage in discussions from the reasons you have listed, and I just don't really care about like stating my opinion to like put people online. I made a video
about
it.
You don't know, right? Like it's
like I just don't.
What
I
are
don't
you
know.
trying to gain?
Yeah, like I don't mess with that. I just read it because I think it's hilarious. Other than that, I did make a video about it, and my opinion is that all of these cards should probably be addressed. And the way I viewed this is I tried to find a solution, and pretty much what I think is they kind of messed it up a long time ago when they started printing cards that are way too good, and trap decks overall just fell off because trap cards just couldn't compete anymore. And I feel like that was the main issue. And then when you have cards like Eradicator, some decks, and not always trap decks, just overall, sometimes decks need to play these kinds of cards. Right now, that's the case for Labyrinth, where it's the only thing that sort of pushes them to the level of other decks where you're just trying to prevent people from playing, pretty much. Like, people are doing it with the Gimmick Puppet Lock, people have been doing it with, like, Scythe and stuff like that. And right now, a trap deck just has Eradicator. And I feel like it just kind of sucks that the game is, like, so far gone to the point where we need to have these types of cards, as opposed to, like, just getting rid of them. Just get rid of every single one of them. I don't even care, like, floodgates, whatever. And then just print good trap cards. That's what I'm missing overall. Maybe I'm just hardcore influenced because I've been playing Edison, but I just respect trap cards, you know, and I just want them to be good.
Yeah, I've enjoyed traps before. I'm typically known as a combo player, but I've done well with trap decks, and I'm not like positioned against or with them greatly. I'm happy to play them if they're good. The thing with trap decks is like, yeah, they're all floodgates right now, or they interact with like the hand, like Eradicator. Like that, that I think is toxic. I think they should interact mostly with the board and not be floodgates. Like, even Skill Drain is a floodgate, but I'm honestly fine with it, I guess.
Yeah.
That's like the one I am okay with, I think. But you want stuff more that interacts with the field, like removal, punishment. Is a good trap card that's like fair.
Yes.
However, the problem is with too many of those type trap cards is modern Yu-Gi-Oh has so many back removal cards that if you have cards you can't just activate immediately, you will get blown out a lot.
Yeah.
So Edison didn't have those blowouts, right?
Of
like
course.
what you have.
Yeah, I mean, you have
you're not getting
and,
double storm, dusted, or triple evenly. Like those invalidate a lot of these set 5 strategies. You need a counter plan, and oftentimes the counter plan is to Eradicator, which is like that's their way of beating that.
Literally.
It sucks that sometimes it just hits you for a billion anyways. But there needs to be, like, if you want traps to be competitive and also non-toxic, the reason that, I mean, there's more things that need to change than just the floodgates going away.
Of course. I also pointed that out in the video. I said just get rid of the floodgates and also, like, do what they did with semi-limiting Lightning Storm. I feel like this was a great step in the right direction, pretty much. And I feel like they have to, like, start taking away blowout cards as well. And at that point, trap decks won't feel the need to play toxic stuff anymore, because they can just sort of, like, live in their, like, you know, habitat in the meta, because they will just not get blown out every single time. So I think that's also the Lightning Storm to 2. I really liked that hit. I felt like it was addressing something meaningful.
I don't think it really does enough though, because there's still 6 big blowouts,
it probably
and then
doesn't do
twin
enough,
boosters as well.
Something.
The alternative is if they make those cards better or more impervious to removal in some sort of way. But that would just require a whole new printing of trap type effects.
Yeah.
Like Eldritch, you're pretty solid at that, where you don't get punched as bad by the back removal as long as you can still stay alive that turn.
Yeah.
And even Labyrinth isn't terrible with, like, its actual engine, because they all reset itself, and that's like the direction it needs to take. But you're still just encouraged to play all these floods, and it's not enough to keep up without the floods most of the time.
No, probably isn't. Like, if you look at Traptrix was a very interesting deck, and it wasn't that trap reliant. I really liked that, and like Holotea does stuff in the grave as well, and being printed as a new card. I feel like they knew what they were doing when they printed it, but still the deck itself kind of fell off. So then you can again see the difference in the power level of certain decks.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess speaking of other decks, was there anything that really, I don't know, surprised you, impressed you, or whatever? If you look at Top Cut, like you're able to see like Rika, Methmec, Plunder, like a lot of decks do well in these last couple of nationals.
The Rika stuff is probably the one to talk about the most, because it keeps showing up.
Yes.
And never in great numbers, but it's always there to some degree. It's kind of showing that despite a small player base, it manages to keep up there, and it is being probably overlooked. You have to wonder how much of it's attributed to the opponents just not knowing what the cards do and not knowing good choke points or ways to beat it. But the deck does well enough. Like, it got top 4 and top 8 in the German nationals, and that's not the only time it's done well either. So I'm curious to see if it continues to perform. I personally don't think it will become mainstream tier 1. I think It is a bit flawed. I think it interacts with monsters pretty well, but it sucks with back row, and then it can't deal with like Labyrinth, for example. And that's a big problem. And then it also just like you aren't even that like good into combos. So like your opponent goes to Rise Heart, you need to dedicate a lot of slots to make sure you can actually beat that. And the deck is just like, I don't think it has that much of an edge outside of your opponent just probably not knowing what your cards do.
That's true. And like overall, Rika players are just hardcore fans. They're like diehards, you know, every single time.
But there's plenty of other
Rika.
hardcore fans for other decks. And,
of course,
and they're not
of course.
doing as well as the Rika players.
True. But like Rika was really interesting because it was always popping up. It was always there. And yeah, people were mainly just confused when they were up against it. But yeah, you mentioned like anything runic sprite, and overall just anything runic can just do well right now. And you can see like plunder variants and other things. Do you think there is like a particular variant with runic, even runic sprite, that you think is like better? Because from what I've been reading on Twitter, people have been saying how there was almost no pure sprite variant from looking at Top Cut. I'm pretty sure the Ding Kong Farm did play the Melfi version.
I think that's a pretty good representation of my thoughts. I don't think a pure sprite's that strong. Like, you always have to compare what are your advantages. Like, is your end board stronger? Is your grind game better? Are you less vulnerable to disruption? I think they both kind of struggle versus Dark Ruler, like the runic versions. If anything, the runic version has more counterplay because you'll still have to fountain up. I think it's probably worse into removal because you can't keep summoning level 2 extenders with the runic cards. So I don't really see if there's a reason to play the sprite cards pure. So the reason you want to play the sprite cards pure, like the reason you wouldn't play them against tiers, but you'd play hand traps, is if the runics are like very bad as board breakers because they don't play well going second.
Right.
If that engine isn't really helpful going second, then the runic sprite won't be that good. But if those cards are fine going second and can let you play enough of the time, then that's when you want to be playing those engines because they're just better than hand traps typically in that format. So yeah, I mean that's the format we kind of look like we're in, where hand traps aren't particularly strong right now because there's not really great choke points.
Yeah.
And therefore, you want to have just stronger engine pieces, and then the runic deck just seems to be better. As for which one specifically I've been liking, I haven't really decided that much, but I'm leaning towards the for hire deck. That may change as more people learn about it, because sometimes you just catch people off without really knowing what your deck is doing. But if people know like what the lines lead to more often, it's way easier to get countered.
So let me ask you something. When I was talking to Rafael Neven, he pointed out something that I felt was quite interesting, and I want your opinion on that. So he pretty much said that he views runic cards like I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he feels like they aren't as great if you look at what they do in terms of, yes, they are engine, but they can also act as pseudo non-engine. But he pointed out that he felt like they don't do enough as the pseudo non-engine, and he doesn't prefer these types of variants because you can't play enough non-engine. And I asked him if he doesn't view these kinds of effects as non-engine, essentially, because you're destroying back row, you're negating effects, you're popping monsters and all that. And he felt like it's not enough. Do you think the runic cards do enough as a pseudo non-engine, or is there like is it lacking still?
Yeah, so I mean this will change from each format, but when the runic cards were initially announced, I was testing them, and yeah, like in that specific format, the runic cards didn't feel like they were enough of a non-engine. And this can happen pretty often where they're not powerful enough because their effects are okay at a base level. They're not insane. But that is something that's relative to the rest of the format. Right now, how are they as interrupts? Well, if you can pair it with something else like a Dark Ruler or an Evenly, then one of like 9 runic spells could be a great way, or even not 9, like one of 3 or 4 runic spells, even so 12 copies in your deck, could be a way to force a carrot that way and evenly goes through, and that could be a good thing. That's
pretty much what he said, that you have to pair them, and that's why he doesn't like it, because you have to rely on drawing, the combination.
Yeah, so I've typically not liked runic decks that much because of that as well, and I've played them, but again, that may change again in the future, right? If we don't see new good cards being released and another ban list happens, and the power level of the game just continues to go down, and the runic cards into fields just get stronger. And then maybe they are good enough. They aren't completely baseless as non-engine. They still have some utility, but they are definitely weaker than a card you could just dedicate for non-engine. It's definitely a trap to think of them as your utility cards that will solve all problems, because oftentimes they can't, but they can help, where sometimes full engine decks don't have enough versatility. The runic cards do at least have some other options.
Okay, that's fair. I understand that. And also, switching to another deck, you've been playing Kashtira yourself quite a lot. And also, of course, like I said, props for doing well at Chile, at Philly, like you've been just grinding with the deck. How do you view it right now? Post the ban list, a Rise Heart 2-1. Walk me through your thought process, just looking at this ban list and trying to figure out Kashtira.
I still think it's the best deck. I've had a mixed relationship with the deck, because I really don't like the way it plays. I don't enjoy playing it. And for the first few bits of the format, when it came out, I refused to play because how much I hate it.
Yeah, you were kind of beefing about Kashtira.
I eventually gave in because I realized, it was the best deck. And then I played it and realized, like, it's just bullying. Like, if your opponents don't have the specific counters to your deck, like they aren't focusing it down, they will get slaughtered. They need to have stuff like Book of Moons or talents in their deck. Or it just feels like your deck is leagues better than theirs. And that happened a lot. And people keep disrespecting Kashtira. They don't treat it like it's a tier element type deck, and that's interesting to me. Like, maybe it's not as good as tier element, but it feels like you need that type of dedication towards it. Because if you are just putting like cards like Valor and Mourner in against it, which happened a lot last format, I feel like you're just burning your cards against them. Like you were hand looping yourself. That would happen a lot, and I felt like I'd always win because my cards were just, my non-engine was just significantly better than theirs in those spots. I get like double Mourner at a turn, and then still end on like Unicorn Fenrir, set Book of Moon pass, and they would just still die because they had 4 cards in hand to like, something real. And I had a follow up still. I just think it's really good. I think now it is definitely worse because your turn 1 is restricted on options. You still have a couple things you could do. I think the extending into like this fancy field of the Raid Raptors is not good. The biggest weakness is its inability to interact with spell cards. And there's no way that a rank 4 engine could fix that. So there's no point in playing those, in my opinion. It's not worth the bricks.
Okay.
I feel like if talents and thrust or whatever are extremely popular in a format, then you don't want to end on a Rise Heart. And that's probably the biggest fear I'd have, because a Rise Heart's a huge liability versus those. But there is an alternative, and you can just do what I said, where you go Unicorn Fenrir pass. And if the format kind of evolves into more value-based and slow, then that's a great alternative, because you are going +2 there with 2 disruptions and follow-up really easily. And if they leave up your field, those follow-ups, like those Fenrir and Unicorn, will still continue to gain advantage. And I think that's really threatening. So I've been trying that out, and I like it a lot. Obviously, Shifter's still nuts, and you have access to that when most decks don't. And if you play against a deck that is super graveyard reliant, you can still always go a Rise Heart. And the nice thing is the deck can also just play like 18 non-engine, so you can really flexibly fit it to suit whatever the format is looking like. You have some restrictions. Cards like Bistrol's Retaliating Seed aren't great in the deck because of locking your own zones, of course. One thing to note is they get a little bit better with Sky Striker Azalea now, because you can clear your own field. Specifically referring to Magnamut, because you can like Magnamut something and then Druid Worm and like make Azalea to clear. Because before, your only other clear was Donner, but Donner requires one of a monster, which they could kind of play around enough of the time if they were smart.
What's your approach to non-engine in the deck right now, without giving away too much, I guess, secrets?
So a lot of people are choosing going second because of that problem I talked about, where your first turn is very narrow-minded typically, and they can't target it down. I still like going first because I still think you can mix it up enough with Fenrir, Unicorn Pass type stuff. And I like that play a lot, just to be passive, because most decks will not be able to punish you. Like the Mirror really can't kill you that often, especially if you back it up with cards like Book. And Runic decks obviously can't kill you either. So even if you have going second cards like Dark Ruler in your deck, you can hold those in your hand for next turn and then still punish them on the return. So I have been liking that. I think you can side into a bunch of go second stuff. I just think if your deck is fully developed to go second and they force you to go first post side, It could be a little annoying, and then also both side can be a little weird because you don't know if they're making you first or second, so
Yeah.
siding gets a bit hard. You may want to side cards like Lance's in because Lance beats the talent problem, or anti-spell even is great for beating talents and other cards. So yeah, I think I just like standard go first cash. Nothing fancy.
Okay.
Play a value-based game. Make sure you always have follow-up, and your engine is just oftentimes superior to your opponents. And then use your tech spots to just really target down other matchups. To make sure you have talent somewhere in the main or side of the mirror. You have anti-spells as well. Lances, I think, is a good one as well to put in versus like Runic because you have a Lance plus a Rise Heart. It becomes really hard from the clear stuff. Yeah, I think that is just a really solid deck, and it feels like you have no real bad matchups. They're all slightly favorable.
That's really cool. Like, if people still like enjoyed this deck, I feel like it's also fair because the ban list didn't hit it that much, and people invested in the deck. Like, the deck wasn't that cheap to acquire, and I think it's fair that they still get the chance to play it. There was some, like, I guess, some backlash from the community post the ban list, like, cash wasn't hit enough, but I feel like it's fair because it was the first ban list. I think it was very reasonable. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the deck, so I'd be happy to see it go. But, yeah, I think it warps the format a lot with the Rise, Heart, and Shifter being so prominent. Your deck's way harder to compete.
Yeah, those cards are issues. But then we're back at the point that I was making earlier. Everyone's just trying to make the opponent not play. It's literally like, I don't know, man. I probably preferred like tier format. It was more interactive than that. So yeah,
I think you'll almost never get the same amount of interactions you get with tier format. That was an anomaly.
Yes, but it was a breath of fresh air, I feel like, because what's been going on in the game.
A lot of people took it for granted.
Yes, that's also very true. That's also very true. So let's talk branded. We have not talked about this deck yet, and we did mention Eradicator before. So, like, do you have any particular takes on the Puppet Lock, on Expulsion getting banned, and the Puppet Lock still existing? Overall, your takes on branded, because branded is always just always seems like it's struggling, like it's doing well, but then it just always has a lot of things going against it.
I think this deck sucks. I have played it for 2 events last year around the WCK season, and I regret it because the deck just bricks a lot, and you have a lot of just glaring weaknesses to specific cards. Like, there's so many cards where if you see your game plan just crumbles. Ash is not even the worst of them. Anti-spell is so unbearable.
Oh my god.
Like, at least Cashier I can have a Fenrir to like try and play. In Despia, it feels like it's pointless.
Sad.
D barrier is the same. Like, you have no recourse, it feels like. And then like you also have to be able to play going second, and to do that you need non-engine because the deck's engine isn't good enough, I think. And non-engine in that deck just makes you brick more in a deck with like an unnecessary amount of cards that can't be used on the first turn.
Yeah.
Because they just don't contribute well. It has a lot of choke points. It has several like, loss condition cards that you just can't play against. I think the deck is just not good. That's just sadly the truth.
There's just so much wrong with it. But it is like, it's also a deck that's hard to play. So then if you pair that together with the fact that it isn't that great, then it's not much of a surprise when not many players are picking it up. But it is still seeing like some results. Like if you look at, I think in Germany, I think Branded and Rika had the same representation in Top Cut of Nationals. So like people are still playing it. It just, the conversion rates aren't great. Let's see, I've compiled a list of decks I want us to talk about. And another one I wanted to point out is Dragon, like anything Dragon, like I don't know, Bistio control. Some people get offended if you call their Bistio control deck Dragon Link. Yeah. So anything.
I've made that mistake before. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I don't like at this point. I don't want to speak. I'm just like Dragon stuff, and I hope that people don't hate me. So like anything Dragon.
As if Dragon Link is some crazy identity only for one deck. Yeah. Yeah, so dragons, I think the heart and the soul of that is the bestial cards. They seem very, very strong into like the twin stuff. And then obviously versus branded, they're good. Versus labyrinth, they can hit stuff as well. They're big bodies and field that you can use for links. They can attack themselves. And with Chaos Angel being released now, there's a lot of ways to turn that into Chaos Angel, which is great. 35 beat
Chaos
sticks
Angel
that
is a
banishes a
custom
card on
card
summon
anyway.
is very good.
Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, I think dragons are fine on the back of bestials. My biggest problem though, Kashtira. Those bestials line up so poorly, and Shifter and Arise Heart is so annoying.
Yes. It is a tough matchup. It's nice against Sprite though. Sprite is kind of struggling with big bodies and like,
Yeah.
it's not bad. It's not bad. It's a decent showing against Sprite. So yeah, I think Dragon is not in a bad spot overall. It makes sense when it does well. And I just love it because of like nostalgia value from the old Dragon Link deck. I think it's just cool seeing Dragon do well. So another deck that we probably have to mention, or two decks actually, is Super Heavy Samurai and Pearly. So post the ban list, everyone was like, oh, Pearly's dead, oh my god, no, but it's getting support. Like, I think Pearly is still gonna be fine, and it is actually seeing some tops here and there, where Super Heavy Samurai just kind of like disappeared. So yeah, what do you think about that? Is it that people just don't really care about trying things out with Super Heavy? Is it completely dead? Because like Wakaushi is also like a custom card pretty much, so like what's up with that?
So I thought Super Heavy sucked before the ban list, to be honest. It doesn't
Okay.
play well into disruptions as far as the solo deck. It does well into negations, but removal it struggles against. And that's most types that actually playing against going second, right? There's Flashing Fire, there's Arise Heart, there's Fenrir, there's Book of Moons, there's the Twin Pops, there's Lovely popping. There's so much removal when you're going second that if your deck sucks into removal, you're going to have to rely on non-engine. But relying on non-engine with only hand traps in a format where hand traps suck sounds like a bad choice.
Yeah.
So Super Heavy, I never felt like were that good. I didn't think they were good last format either, and then obviously they're way worse now. I think as a solo deck, the deck is dead. However, Wakashi, as far as a one-card engine goes, is incredibly powerful. And I think it will take some time before people figure out how to use it properly. And we've seen a couple regional decks top with it in random decks. It can be used in stuff from like Runic to Math Mech to Kashtira. We've seen it being used in. It has a lot of flexibility, and it can be used in a lot of stuff. So I think that as an engine has promise at some point. But obviously, incorporating like a minimum really of 2 bricks in your deck typically is not great. You need to make sure the payoff is worth it, and sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. So you don't get too antsy with throwing them in any deck.
So what about Pearly?
Pearly has been doing decently. Yeah, I mean, I think the deck really thrives when it goes second because its best card to me is the Happiness rank 2.
Yeah.
That card is really good, and you can get a lot of searches. You can set up OTKs. You can clear fields. That's what I like that deck. That's when I think it kind of performs the strongest. So I like going second with that deck, just because you're better turn one who's using Delicious and Plump, and you can no longer get that in a consistent manner.
Yeah.
So I prefer going second. And going first, you can still noir them, but it requires a heavier engine hand, and the deck doesn't actually have that much engine. You only have 10 quick play spells, and then the 3 My Friends and the 6 other cats. Not counting the field spell here. And yeah, you can get some draw cards in, and maybe that bridges the gap, like the Runic deck where the twin draws or the Raphael draw gets you the next Runics to keep the cycle going, but I don't know if it does. And I think that kind of makes Pirelli kind of met going first. Again, I think that going second with the Zeus and Noir plays with Happiness is really strong, but you don't want your deck to suck going first because you may do well in Swiss, but when people know what you're playing in Top Cut, and they often will, you will struggle. So it depends what your goals are. If your goals are just the top, then Pirelli going second might be a fine choice. But for a competitive player like myself, the goal is to go to Worlds, right? So
Of course.
you have to make sure that even when your opponent knows what you're playing, your deck can hold up.
So speaking of going to Worlds and all your preparation, what does your preparation look like right now? You're prepping for NAWCQ and all of that. Without giving away any kind of spoilers and secrets and all of that, like how do you go about your day thinking about NAWCQ and just preparation?
I try to look at it through the lens of just problem solving. So I try to figure out what problems are for each deck or the format, what boards you're trying to break, what disruptions you're trying to beat from perspective of a general deck or of a specific deck, and then trying to think if I can actually solve that problem. And then if I have an idea, I'll run with it until I have a test build made, and then we'll actually test it in action, get an idea if it was a real solution or it wasn't, if any new problems arose in its place, if it was consistent enough. And then you kind of keep developing that idea until it either becomes a real idea to play or it's just a dud and you go back to the drawing board. And then once you have a real idea that works, then it's practicing it so that you're like confident and with the deck and you can make the plays consistently, properly without, taking years during the match.
Of course, yeah. So you've said that the format isn't exactly ideal. It's kind of meh. There's a lot of diversity. It's much harder to prepare for. Does that discourage you at all from preparations and having to think about a million different decks?
No, that's just one problem to deal with.
Okay.
Doesn't matter.
All right. So do you feel like the ban list when it comes in the fall, and I know that's very early talk, but do you feel like there are certain hits that have to be made for the format to be somewhat addressed? Because there was a lot of people complaining about Kashtira not being hit enough, and of course there was a lot of memes going around about Fountain to 2, which pretty much just probably means that runic stuff is getting slaughtered in the fall, and maybe Bandit gets hit as well. Like, what do you think should be the most important changes on the, like, I guess, upcoming ban list in some time?
Yeah, so I think Cash needs to get hit greatly. Even Shifter as well. Those floods are really annoying. I think just mild hits to everything. Like, I don't think Labyrinth needs a big hit. Maybe you can put Big Welcome to 1. That way, if you're going to use a graveyard effect, that's your only chance using it. And also means after you use it the first time, you have to actively be setting it with Lovely to get access back to it again. And also may force you to put more reliance on the field spell to be able to revive your Lovely if it goes to the grave. So that's something that I think would be okay hit to the deck without destroying it. Ideally, those floodgates like Antispell, Barrier, Eradicate would get hit, but I'm not hopeful.
Amazing.
And then the runic cards are fine. Honestly, maybe a small hit to them, tip to 1. I think the cards that are showing they're really good and should get hit because they've been played for almost a year now is Sprite. Incredibly versatile engine that can be used in almost anything level 2 or even Link 2 or XYZ 2 related. Like, you see with Pirelli's even sometimes. And specifically, those bolster the runic cards a lot. If blue is not legal, ban may be excessive, but just imagine blue is not legal.
Yeah.
The runic cards get a lot worse.
Yes.
Because now you can't convert them into cards, right? Like, you don't have access to a billion engines via the sprites.
Yeah. I think they're getting hit because they're gonna sell the reprints with Tactical Masters getting reprinted in the tins. They just won't care. They're just gonna be like, okay, we gave you Fountain to 2, now we're just murdering the deck, and then we're also gonna be murdering Sprite because why not? Like, I think that's pretty much what's happening. And speaking of the future and the future formats, the ban list talk might be a bit too far, out in the horizon. But yeah, but like, speaking of the cards that are coming out right now, what do you think of the Monsters Revenge set? Like, random cards like, I don't know, Duality and the Synchron and all of that.
It won't really have much of an impact. So Duality and Shadow's Light are interesting cards that could have a place at some point. And while they have relatively strong effects, unsearchable spells like that, they need to be put, like, they can make good combos around them, but build an entire deck around it almost never works, because if the deck doesn't work well without those cards, it's not a real deck. You'll see them like every third game, and that's not enough to be competitively viable. So those cards are kind of gimmicky right now, but does not mean they can't be good in the future. As for Assault Synchron, that's the one with the most kind of uncertainty around it. I think that card's a bit overhyped, because if you just wanted a level 2 tuner you could summon without normal summoning as an extender, if you can sacrifice an extra spot for Ready Fusion, you have the same thing. You lose the Synchron tag, which may matter for a small amount of decks, and you lose the 1 extra deck spot. But you're also not locked into Synchros now. With those, you can make with Allvain, with Ready Fusion, you can make Synchros and XYZs and Links, not just Synchros like Assault Synchron. Diminishing copies now. So now if you want to have a second Assault Synchron for later on in the game, you can use that with Ready Fusion. You can't unless you play multiple fusions. So there are a couple differences. But I think if the main purpose was to just get a level 2 tournament field, we could have already been doing that. And we haven't. So I wonder if it'll actually make a meaningful difference. I think if Bestials are really good in a format, it's a nice way to go into Baron. But Bestials are okay right now because the Cashier, they're not going to dominate. And then even then, we don't have Chaos Ruler like the OCG, so we can't really take advantage like they can.
Yeah. I feel like, I mean, they've been sort of like hyping up Assault Synchron in connection to the Duelist Nexus set from what I've seen. So they're saying like, oh, there's going to be so much hype around Synchro Summoning and the Assault Synchro is just the beginning. So I don't know, maybe we'll see like towards the end of summer some shift when it comes to that. But of course, right now we are focused on NAWCQ, on Euros. And, you know, I think this was a really cool talk. I feel like people can gain info from that if they are prepping. And of course, I wish you all the best when you go to the events, and I wish you all the luck and, you know, in your testing and to figure out everything perfectly. And I hope you do really well.
Thank you. Yeah, you too, right? Did you be at the UWCQ?
No, I'm not going. We had nationals here in Slovenia. I played branded.
No.
Wasn't ideal. I got anti-spout and then I cried. So
yeah, you don't get to play so many of your games.
Yeah, it was really sad. And it was also the last ban list. We had nationals 2 days before the new ban list was legal. So it wasn't ideal. But yeah, all in all, you know, I think we have like events coming up, and of course the season sort of dies down in the summer, but there is still a lot of hype around Worlds and all of that. We haven't had Worlds in some time, so I think there's gonna be
been a while.
hype.
4 years.
Yeah, and I'm really, really excited for that. And I want to thank you for being a part of this conversation. I always learn something from talking to you every single time, so I appreciate you a lot. And I think the people do too. So yeah, I'm grateful.
No problem. And thank you for having me.
Of course. And if you guys like the video, of course, please make sure to like it. Make sure to check out Jesse on all his socials. His content is amazing. So if you just want to listen to a bunch of knowledgeable stuff when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh, my lights are shutting off like around me. So I think they're saying like we have to wrap this video up. So
that time, yeah. Right.
So thank you for watching. Thanks for all the support, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.